cities looking into their food systems. And within our action track process, which is basically the global thinking process, there are several entry points looking into territorial approaches, vertical governance, and working with cities networks such as C40 or ICLEI or the Milano Covenant. You put me on the spot with more cities doing dialogues. They will definitely be there. The best overview is to be found at summitdialogues.org, where you see wherever in the world this is happening. But I'm sure London is not standing alone there, but more at least will be following your example or have already done their dialogues.
Thanks so much, Martin. And if the mayor decides that he wants to step up on the global stage in New York in September with a really ambitious food pledge from London, would Agnes Kalibata, your boss, be able to provide a platform for him, all being equal? Sorry to ask an invidious question.
I would be surprised if she wouldn't, and I would certainly advocate for it.
A true diplomat, and thank you for your gracious remarks about last night. Thank you, Martin. Ananda, it's very kind of you to join us as well. It would be really good to hear your thoughts on what's happening in the UK.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you, Martin, as well. My name is Ananda Guheim. I'm a Deputy Director responsible for food promotion and exports in DEFRA, the UK Agriculture and Environment Ministry. I'm also the UK's national convener for our dialogues. I'd just like to start by thanking Ed, you and your team at WRI, but also London Food Board for what I hope is going to be a really, really useful discussion. Certainly, I'll talk a bit about the dialogues we've had, and we found them extremely rich. And I just wanted to riff off a couple of things that both of you were saying. One of which is, like you, Ed, I'm also from London, and I'm really struck by how the food we eat, the food we produce, the food we promote is very much a mirror of the diversity of the city. And I think fundamentally, it's great to hear that lots of people are going into jobs in food, particularly after the year we've had. But also, we think we should be a test bed for innovation in this area. I think something like 4 million jobs in the UK are related to food, a lot of them in hospitality, clearly, but clearly in the primary and manufacturing sector in London is very much part of it. It's absolutely critical that we think about the food system in a slightly different way. So fully take on board Martin's point that this is a very different type of summit that we're looking forward to in September. Not least because something like 10% of emissions, certainly in the UK, emanate from the agri sector. So as we run into both the Food Systems Summit and COP at the end of the year, having clear plans on net zero and so forth is going to be absolutely critical. And what we need to do is not mandate solutions from government, but we need to have dialogues with the sector. Particularly so, the past year has been hugely challenging for all of us. We all know that. Not least because it's highlighted vulnerabilities that in something we take for granted. That's the food system. But I think what we found in the UK, both with the Brexit process, but also with COVID, is having a richer pretty candid dialogue with food system stakeholders from SMEs all the way up, including consumers, has really helped. And we've shown quite a lot of resilience and adaptability, probably more than any of us could have predicted. So I see today's discussion as an opportunity to further bring together those types of diverse and quite rich perspectives on how we can transform the food system. And I think we need to kind of reflect on some of the challenges that people have faced over the past year and how we have worked successfully across the sector, across pillars to overcome those barriers to make the system more sustainable and resilient. Now, in terms of the dialogue discussions that we've had, we've been docking into Henry Dimbleby with his independent food review that will hopefully report quite soon. He's been conducting a series of citizens' assemblies. We've also been working quite closely with the devolved administration governments on this. But what we've managed to do is capture views across a wide range of areas on things like sustainable agriculture, on nutrition, and on waste from the whole length and breadth of the food system across these aisles. And what we've found is that there's a real passion amongst people working in the food system to make sure that it works well for all. And there's acceptance that there needs to be an evolution of the system, and that won't happen overnight. We're still reaching in and finding bits that work. We're seeking out best practice. And we've been hearing from, as I say, the smallest SMEs, and 99% of the sector in the UK are SMEs, all the way up to huge multinationals, that things like environmental sustainability, ensuring that producers can earn sufficient amounts. A lot of these are very low margin businesses, but also making sure that people understand and have choice on what they're producing, what they're consuming, and on things like packaging. Whether it's on compostable packaging, whether it's on waste, whether it's on recycling. I was just reading today. There's a big article in the FT about how various large firms are completely switching their packaging to paper. I think there's a reference to Johnny Walker producing some of its whiskey in paper containers, which is great, not least for hauliers, because apparently whiskey consumed in paper is far lighter. I don't understand the science of it, but I understand this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to showcase and encourage others to take on, not least all those wonderful small distilleries in London that we all, those of us who live here, are hoping to enjoy again quite soon. The other message that came across from our dialogues was that we do need to build upon the lessons learned during the COVID pandemic. It's partly, as I say, about collaboration between all the players. It's about coming to the table and not thinking about it as a competitive thing. As Bill Gates has often said about COVID, we're all on the same side. Let's kind of make it, let's address it in that way. The other thing, of course, is to be clear, and stakeholders have highlighted that we need to talk and understand that there is a role that consumers can play in shifting to sustainable consumer patterns. And that's partly about ensuring that we have better education, that we have better information, to allow people to make informed choices. Now, the UK is about to publish further stuff on obesity, childhood obesity. It's a big debate. It's been accelerated by the discussions, by the experiences we've been having on COVID, for instance, because of health outcomes of people who are obese or have other challenging conditions. And I think it's important that we engage and include and find out the views of consumers in this. So we have a multitude of stakeholders, and we need to make sure that they have their say, and we create better understanding on areas around food and food systems in particular. So I'll conclude just by saying that this is challenging, but it's quite an exciting time for us to think about the whole food system, the future of food, if you will. And one of the things that me and my team are doing in DEFRA is thinking much more extensively about how the UK can exert a role in food diplomacy or food thought leadership. So this is very much part of it. We're very much looking forward to the pre-summit in Rome next month. It's a shame it's not happening on Saturday, because then some of us would have an excuse to go and cheer on England. And of course, we'll be looking forward to the summit in September itself, around the time of UNGA. But I don't think I'll be going to either of those, but I'm very delighted to participate in the dialogue today as we build momentum towards both the summit and, as I said, COP26 in November. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you for initiating this conversation. Thank you for being part of this conversation and hopefully part of a global solution. Thank you.
Ananda, thank you. That was a really wonderful set of remarks. Really, really appreciated those. And thank you for attending, and thank you for your leadership, and thank you to your colleagues. Lots of questions in my mind, but I think in the interest of time, let's turn to our third guest speaker, Ruth Westcott. Ruth, you're a great leader on this agenda in the UK and in London, and it'd be great to hear from you. Could you just set the scene, A, on what's happening in London, B, what you and your colleagues in civil society are doing, and give us a flavour of some of the issues that we'll be talking about in our dialogue over the coming months. Thank you.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you for convening this and for inviting me. It's great. It's absolutely great to be here, and let's not talk too much about football because I'm a Wales fan, actually. So it's been sort of mixed blessings. Right, I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay, because I do have a few slides it's not anything too complicated. It's just to sort of save you from looking at my face too much. Okay, hopefully you can, let me just go to slideshow, sorry. Hopefully you can see slides now. Ed, could you nod if you can? Because I can see your face. Yeah, great. So I thought I would just spend a few minutes giving you what is, I hope, a very quick whistle-stop introduction of what has been done on food in London very well, I think, and perhaps some opportunities and sort of where we are now and where we think some of the priorities for food in London could be over the next year, 18 months and longer. So London has a population of 9 million. As a block, we are a very large consumer of food and a significant opportunity to shift consumer patterns, we think. And that 9 million is split up into 32 councils across the UK. And we have one of the richest borough in the UK, with Kensington and Chelsea, and about 3 of the poorest, Hackney, Tower Hamlets and Barking and Dagenham, although it is fair to say that the trajectory of London boroughs generally is to get richer, whilst boroughs in the north and in the coastal areas of England and Wales are getting poorer. So the trajectory on London generally is up, although I think that probably continues to hide economic disparity within boroughs. So London released a food strategy in 2018. It was led by the mayor, and it broke down solutions to, creating a better food system into these 6 topics: home and reducing household food insecurity, the economy, shopping and eating out, community settings and public institutions, which the mayor does have some influence over. The mayor has influence over Transport for London and the Metropolitan Police and some other kind of public institutions, pregnancy and childhood, growing, community gardening and urban farming, and the environment. And so since 2008, led by the mayor, several of these have been somewhat developed and some of them perhaps less so, I would say. I think the mayor is doing really well on food insecurity. Actually, we do have lower rates of food poverty than other places in the UK, which has been led by a combination of initiatives from the mayor and local authorities. And he's really put lots of attention into tackling holiday hunger and increasing the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers and free school meals, and in encouraging boroughs to provide universal free school meals, so not just to children in infants age up to 7, but all the way through primary, so up to age 11. And that's being picked up on a kind of borough by borough basis with the support and the encouragement of the mayor. We have a London Food Board, as was mentioned. That was first set up by Boris Johnson when he was the mayor, actually, and it continues to meet about 4 times a year. They've been really concentrating on the recovery from COVID recently, but have also got a remit for other things around environment and health, of course. And London also has its own childhood obesity task force, which was set up because obesity has really been a priority of Mayor Sadiq Khan. And perhaps these 2 groups' most famous achievements so far perhaps has been the ban on junk food advertising across the London Transport Network, which we think was the first in the world perhaps to have that universal blanket ban on advertising of food which doesn't meet certain standards for health. And question mark, could potentially be applied to climate friendly food, perhaps? I'll leave that as a question for the group. Another area which has been successful for London Food, we think, is that we have a network of community food growing spaces across London, and they're all mapped on the Capital Growth website. And this is a project which has been led by Sustain since 2012, when we had an ambition in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics to create 2012 community food growing spaces. And now our role is to keep them going, provide training, encourage opportunities for volunteers to get involved, and increasingly to protect the food growing spaces in the face of development, and house building, and to get community food growing built into local plans to make sure that they're protected and also increased over time. It's fair to say the majority of the food growing spaces are in schools, and then many others are in parks and other food growing spaces and on estates. And I suppose one of our missions is also to build on what we've learned in schools and really start to embed particularly larger food growing spaces, and to help them to ramp up and make a transition into being a little bit more commercial and having growing spaces to produce, as well as to be great spaces for communities to get together and build local resilience. So I mentioned that there are 32 councils in London, and I think it's fair to say that the performance of the boroughs on various food related issues varies greatly between boroughs. And so the food environment that you have varies greatly depending on whether you happen to live in Islington or one of the boroughs that performs lower. And we know this because every year London produces a map and a league table of how well boroughs are performing on a range of food issues. And you can see those issues listed across the top, from supporting baby friendly and breastfeeding across to actions taken to reduce sugar in people's diets and Sugar Smart. We actually didn't do this in 2020, recognising how pressed boroughs were with COVID response, and instead we produced a report about how well boroughs had been dealing with emergency COVID response and some climate change actions. And you can find these reports all on the Sustain website. So to move on to particularly talking about climate change, we in the run-up to the mayoral election this year, we worked with the mayor and warmly encouraged him to produce a manifesto on good food. Encouraged all of the candidates to produce a manifesto on good food. And it's fair to say that the Green Party candidate did a very good job, and that also Sadiq Khan did pick up some of the food-related actions in his manifesto that we recommended. And now we believe that these are really things that are in the mayor's gift to take action on. So the first is to confirm the C40 Good Food Cities Declaration and progress the Milan Urban Food Pact through an action plan. So the mayor has made very good commitments to sustainable food through those two declarations, and we really would like to see those developed into a specific action plan. The London food strategy that I mentioned earlier is very good, but it is a strategy rather than an action plan, and it could do with a bit more detail, we think, on the next steps. We think that the mayor could make a really bold commitment to removing factory farmed meat and dairy and reduce overall meat consumption by 50% in the food outlets that they operate, which is food for TfL staff and the I've gone blank. The
schools,
police officers. Sorry, the Metropolitan Police. He doesn't actually control schools, so it would be an encouraging role with schools. And so, sorry, it's TfL staff, GLA staff, so his own staff, and police staff. But so it's not a huge amount of food served, actually, but it is symbolic, and it's still, still a decent number of higher welfare chickens that would benefit, from that commitment. We'd like to see him encourage councils to take more action, particularly on food waste, because that is a statutory obligation for councils. Champion some new nature-friendly farms on existing agricultural land. We've done some work to identify some places in the urban fringe in London. It's surprising how much land is available in the urban fringes in London, in those outer London boroughs, and we think there's bags of opportunity there for nature-friendly farming to create good jobs in nature and give people in urban settings the kind of nature-friendly jobs that they crave. Some work on increasing veg consumption. reducing plastic waste, championing water in schools, and also some work to screen the pension and investment portfolios to just get that, do some work, use their power as an investor. And that brings me to the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, which is being led by our partners and colleagues in Nourish Scotland, and they're aiming to get as many cities and sub-national governments to sign up to a declaration on food and climate change in the run-up to COP26. Of course, recognising that local places are not centre stage in COP26, but the intention is that we want to show a groundswell of support for better action on food and climate change at a local and subnational level for their own sake, but also to put gentle pressure on the national governments that are at COP26 to take more action on food, to make food a higher priority. And we would love London to sign, of course. We've had some really good conversations with the Mayor's team about this, and we're very hopeful that they will, but that would be a great next step, I think, for this group to just see that happen. Just to finish with some other priorities for food, especially around coming out of COVID-19, we think there's lots of work on creating a thriving food economy by developing a good retail strategy specifically, improving health by ensuring all Londoners live in a healthy food neighbourhood. Healthy food neighbourhoods is a quite exciting new concept in town planning, where you create what are called 15-minute neighbourhoods, where you allow people to access growing and nature and good food all within a 15-minute walk from their house. Securing good food for all Londoners through a right to food concept. Manchester and Liverpool and a few other cities have declared themselves right to food cities. We think this is something that London could look at and would be very interesting. And a thriving food economy that creates good food jobs and skills, particularly picking up on this Build Back Better narrative for London. And I just wanted to mention that we've just done a survey of good food enterprises adapting to the pandemic, and we asked good food enterprises how well they'd been able to adapt to the change in buying habits over the pandemic, and we were absolutely astonished by how well small enterprises were very low waste, adapted very quickly to the pandemic, and were able to meet the needs of their community very quickly and very successfully, and how good they were for jobs. They tend to pay a living wage compared to supermarkets, and they tended to be efficient, adaptable, and provide the lifeblood of communities when they needed them. And I think looking at enterprises and small businesses in food, we really should think about that as part of our food security in perhaps a way that we don't at the moment. I think supermarkets were seen as the solution to the food challenges over COVID, and our research would suggest that actually small enterprises were just as good, if not better, as adapting and being capable of surviving and thriving in a crisis. So a few things to think about there, hopefully. I hope that's given a sort of whistle-stop tour of some ideas and sparked ideas as much as anything else. Thanks, and I hope I didn't go on too long, but I'd be really interested to hear some responses, feedback, from you, Ed, or from the group.
I thought it was a brilliant presentation, Ruth, and I think there's a lot there, and I loved the set of asks at the end. So thank you. I wanted to check in with everybody on time. Nick, it'd be great to hear from you. Please come in, and then Julianne, I'd be interested to hear from you too if you'd like to. But Nick, please.
Great, sorry about that. Thanks for that. It was really interesting, and I've been madly tweeting out the Glasgow Declaration, so I wasn't aware of that. And just one thing from the London Climate Action Week hat I'm wearing today, which would be great to put in this dialogue, is and reflects London. So London Climate Action Week's about what we do in London, but it's also recognising London's role as a global hub. And it just seems to me that one of the pieces we could certainly pick up, which would be quite unique, would be to bring finance, insurance, food industry, the Unilevers, the scientists, which are in London, the PR industry and the advertising industry, which is like London is such a strong global centre of, all of which have declarations on climate. But I'm not sure they've connected that as strongly to food as they could have done. So one thing it would be great to take forward as part of London Climate Action Weeks, kind of between weeks, is to kind of look at our global hubs and bring them around this aspect of the climate issue. Because again, one of the point of London Climate Action Week was we've got so many global networks in this city, but they don't talk to each other. They tend to sit in their silos. But actually, it's a very efficient way to bring them together is to use, rather than everybody flying around the world to UN conferences, is to actually use this space as a place to kind of do that joining up. Ananda, I'd be interested to hear what DEFRA's kind of doing on that grounds. I think we've done quite a lot on things like coal and actually on nature, in a sense, Ed, to try and bring those together. But I think food has been rather underemphasized, despite the fact that London is such a capital in terms of global trend setting, as well as industry and financial power. And I think that could be a really exciting way to go into and out of the summit. And again, one of the things we're thinking of a lot is next year is going to have a big theme on resilience, the Africa COP. I think, we're thinking a lot about not just what goes into Glasgow and the food summit, what comes out. And I think for next year's London Climate Action Week, and we'll be looking at the IPCC report, perhaps this issue will be even more salient, actually, than this year when there's a big focus on kind of steel and concrete. I think next year is going to have a big focus on some of these natural systems and how they connect, and particularly their resilience. Both to climate and to the COVID and other areas, again, some amazing work done at the G7 on economic resilience, which to fold in. So that was really just so I'm going to have to leave a bit early because I've got to go and do a real studio interview, which is going to be quite shocking. I did my first working lunch in 18 months yesterday. This is my first live interview for a similar amount of time, so I'm going to need a bit of prep. I'm a bit rusty.
Of course, Nick. Well, thank you for those excellent thoughts. Couldn't agree with you more. Juliana, you're such a good writer. I'm wondering whether Carbon Brief wants to do more writing in this area, and whether you'd be willing to write something about the journey we're about to embark on in London over the next few months, without wishing to put you on the spot.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit early over here and haven't fully formed many thoughts yet this morning at all. But this was a really interesting dialogue, and I've taken a lot of notes and have a lot of reading to sort of catch up on. I'd say, I started at Carbon Brief just about 2 months ago, and we're really, looking to sort of vastly expand our coverage in food systems. And so far, I'd say I have had like a pretty focused a lot on, sort of the national or international level. And so it's really interesting to hear about, sort of all of these programs and initiatives going on at the subnational level. And that's certainly something that I'm interested in, in hearing more about and in writing about going forward.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you. And yes, we'll keep in touch. Ananda, is there anything you'd like to say in addition from what you've heard? No pressure, but always good to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. No. So it's great to hear that there are lots of initiatives. And I think I take Nick's point that everyone has their own plan. The question is, how do we join up? I think in DEFRA we're looking at it from the perspective of both future farming. We're talking about the post-CAP environment. It's one of the peace dividends of leaving the EU, but also we're looking at a 25-year environment plan, and that has to be holistic. And I just wanted to illustrate something that's happening in London that I think shows the importance of this. So where I live in London, we've recently in the main drag, which is next to a very nice part of London, the drag has been neglected for a very long time, but there's now a consultation the council's doing to take advantage of the fact that there's a new school and new supermarket there to rejuvenate that bit of the high street. And they're already talking about the importance of things like tree planting. They're talking about building spaces where people want to sit and enjoy their environment. They're talking about air qualities, But one of the things they're not really talking about is whether the shops in the street are fit for purpose. Okay, there's a few coffee shops there. There's a few shops that could do with probably being sold and taken over by people who could rejuvenate them. But what they're not saying in this consultation is the importance of food in all of this. So food, particularly for those of us who are now working from home, brings us together. So we talk a lot about city centre prets being very quiet as the offices are not opening up. But actually in local areas across London, we need to ensure that we have the right food choices available on the doorstep, so even if it's convenient food and so forth. So I'm just struck there that actually we do need to do a lot more joining up on this, and it's not just for government, it's for civil society, it's for local councils, it's for all sorts of other groups to try and think about it. But this got pinged to me earlier today, and I thinking what Nick was saying, I thought that was very pertinent. That's all I have to say, I think.
Thank you, Ananda. Thank you. Really interesting. Also a reminder that we're all capable of forging this agenda in our immediate community, our immediate area. In terms of next steps, and there's a lot we can do here. So effectively the plan is to do a number of these dialogues. I mean, in an ideal world, we would do 3 between now and the 24th of September, which is the provisional date of the actual UN Food Systems Summit in New York. There's a pre-summit towards the end of July, as you mentioned, Ananda, in Rome. The Prince of Wales is actually giving the closing address at that. And we're hopeful that will see the announcement of the first round of so-called solution clusters or game-changing ideas, as well as commitments from a number of member states. But effectively, the invitation is for us to convene, and when I say us here, it's effectively a combination of, I think, Ruth, if you're up for it, and me, with support from others, including the London Food Board, to gather the community in London over the next few months. Now, everyone's very busy. Lots of the key players doing incredible work on the ground don't have much spare time to do work like this. So we're going to be very respectful of people's time. But there is a 13-page primer from the Food Systems Summit dialogue conveners about the process, which we will follow. And I think the invitation is at the end of that process to submit a small report to the UN of what we've learned and what London's vision is. We would be sure to share that, obviously, Ananda, with you and with colleagues in HMG. And simultaneously, we will work with the Mayor's office to provide him a sense of what we're doing and what are some of the big things in play. And Ruth, you gave a number of those options. And I think we will seek to remind him periodically that there is an opportunity here for all of the good things that London's already doing, plus his ambitions in his second term to raise this level of action on a number of fronts. There is an opportunity for that work to be showcased at the UN Food Systems Summit in September. In fact, I mean, there's actually an opportunity, I think, in Rome for that to happen, but it's probably too soon. I think September is more realistic. So with that, unless there are any last reflections or comments, I think we can declare the process open and reconvene in a month's time, where we'll hopefully be able to get someone from the Mayor's office and the London Food Board and many of the key players across the city working on these issues. So Ananda, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciated your remarks. We've already thanked Martin, who's had to go. Ruth, that was a really fantastic presentation. And thank you to Chris and to Sophie from Ananda's team, and also to Nick and Melanie before him, and Juliana. We will meet again. And in the interim, do keep in touch and let's keep exchanging ideas. But thank you all so much.
Thanks, Ed. See you all soon.
Yeah, take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks, everybody. All the best.